So I am truly excited, and I can't wait for our next speaker to take the stage. He is the director of the emerging payments platform within Google's business development organization. He's helped to bring new payments products to life around the world. So please join me in welcoming Spencer Spinnell to the Secure Trust main stage. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, Spencer.
Of course.
It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
So I personally would love to hear a little bit of your perspective around Google and payments and the strategic vision that Google has as a player in the payments space.
Sure, yeah. No, first, thank you for having me, and thanks to all of you for showing up. Pretty excited just in general at the partnership that we have with so many of you in the audience. We have more than 60 PSPs live.
Wow.
With Google Pay, which is quite exciting. It's many, many years in the making. But just to get back to your question, the vision, which might not seem overly obvious on the surface, there's a couple of things. And we kind of look at, we're a consumer experience company, ultimately, and we think a lot about how to bring best-in-class user experiences to billions of users around the globe. And for us, we think of payments really as a primitive. It's like every user who has a Google account needs to have an easy way to engage in commerce.
Right.
And that is sort of seminal. To us, that's kind of table stakes. And then the second part is we look a lot at the asset base. And again, might not be super obvious. It's things like more than 8 products that have over 1 billion users around the globe. It's the fact that we have hundreds of millions of users who have payment cards already associated with their Google account. And so what we're trying to do is take these assets and take this vision, and also building on the fact that for us, information accessibility and making that information useful is kind of the cornerstone of why Google exists today. And so we think about that. It's also extending that into people's financial lives. So that is what we're trying to do. And we're really thrilled. We take, as hopefully everyone here realizes, a very open ecosystem approach. We feel like Google doesn't benefit unless our partners benefit. And that's really what we're trying to get done.
So can you share a little bit about that partner relationship and how you cultivate that and the benefits that Google derives in that relationship? In particular, for this audience and this industry, so much of what achieves success in payments is through the partnerships and through the collaboration. I think it'd be fascinating to hear from the Google's perspective what that has done to advance your goals in the
payments. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a really good question. I mean, I think partnerships, you look at our core search business and you look at the fact that we're operating in 200 countries and around the globe where we're accepting payments and remitting payments. And if you look at the core search business, that business we weren't the first, but we think we fast followed in a pretty profound way. But what we did, one of the earliest areas of partnership was to help publishers. And what we did is we took that search algorithm where users came, they raised their hand, they said, I'm interested in a particular product or service, and we extended that to publishers in the form of a product called AdSense, where publishers were able to, with a very simple API, show ads on their content pages, which helped them monetize. And this is literally going back 16 years ago. So that's kind of the fundamental. We think a lot about our assets, how to extend our assets so that everyone can benefit. And in the case of, to bring this back to payments, we've always taken a partner-centric approach. Even going back to the very early days, I've been at the company for about 15 years, and I spent about half of that in this area. And so I got my sea legs in the very early days of a product called Google Wallet, which some of you may recall. I'm seeing a head nod in the back here. That product brought together a small subset of the ecosystem. And what we've done now is we just launched our 30th market yesterday.
Wow.
Which is
And
pretty.
and so where was your 30th market?
That was in Switzerland. We also have a product that we launched that's seeing some pretty significant scale in India. So there's Google Pay in India, for those who aren't familiar. I'm sort of deviating from your question a little bit.
No.
Those who aren't familiar, it's a product built on UPI, which was a government and the four large financial institutions got together about 7 years ago. And it was a peer-to-peer platform, a new set of rails and a peer-to-peer platform. It didn't get much usage. In fact, it was kind of falling pretty flat. But what we did, to come back to your idea on partnership, is we said, we're going to sit down with the regulators, we're going to sit down with the banks, and we're going to lobby aggressively to build a layer on top of UPI. And what we saw we've been in market for about 15 months, but what we see there is we have about 40 million monthly active users. We've seen a little bit more than 80 billion in process volume.
Wow.
To kind of advance this to the developed world, in London, for example, where transit is a kind of a critical use case. Users have to tap to get into the tube, and they have to tap out of the tube. But what we see there is where you have these really prolific use cases, we see amazing traction. People start tapping that much more in the real world. And then the last piece I'll add on the partnership construct is just all of the assets that I referenced a couple of minutes ago. We take those assets and we allow third parties, largely merchants, to get access to those in the form of the Google Pay API. So what that means is, if you're a merchant, what you care a lot about, and you guys all know this better than we do, but it's all about removing friction, increasing transaction velocity. And so what we do is we make these APIs available so that a user who's logged into a Google service, we're extending our authentication, and we're making it really easy for users to quickly buy things when they're on a merchant's website and a merchant's app. We run across all channels and all browsers. In fact, the only place where we don't really support is in an iOS app, largely as the nature of that being a more closed environment.
Sure. So I'm going to go back to the India launch in particular, because I think it's fascinating the focus that Google's starting to make in the developing space, particularly because it drives financial inclusion, it expands market access, it enables people who otherwise wouldn't be able to utilize those kinds of platforms to do so. Do you anticipate Google extending reach and deeper into the developing space?
Yeah, I think we have a very, so payments at Google sits within what we call our NBU, or next billion users effort. And so we think about payments, access to payments,
Right.
access to financial products, and generally financial inclusion. We think about that a lot. We also think about financial health and well-being, right? Like the fact that less than 1/3 of the population understands financial well-being is a massive problem. So we think a lot about this, and I think the foray in India, back to your partnership, your question on partnerships, that wouldn't have come together in that way with that kind of scale, really, without working with the entire ecosystem, right? Like I think one party coming in, even with the sort of market penetration that Google does, without the entire ecosystem moving together, we wouldn't be able to have that impact.
Right, and particularly outside the U.S., where having those local relationships and building that kind of level of collaboration is so significant. So here in the U.S., we know Google works with many of you in this room, in this hall right now. Can you offer a little bit of experience in working with the diverse ecosystem? There are networks, there are issuers, there are processors, there are acquirers, there's the sales channel. It's a lot.
Yeah.
That's the vibrancy, that's the energy, that's the excitement. But can you share a little bit of maybe a little bit of some of the challenges, perhaps, that Google encountered in working through some of this?
Absolutely. So I think part of the challenges as a technology company, we have a lot of ideas, right? Innovation is kind of in our lifeblood.
Yeah.
So we launch things and we iterate, and we sometimes don't always take into consideration. Looking over at my colleague here, Steve Kleeb, this runs through his blood. But we we like to move quickly and we like to change our minds sometimes. And I know that doesn't bode well, in particular when all of you make big investments. But I think we've learned a lot in the last 5 or 6 years. And I think, ultimately, there has to be a value exchange beyond just being innovative. Like it's our collective job to bring users and bring scale and bring solutions to market that people want to use. As I was listening to the keynote this morning, our product, our platform, Google Pay, is operating on the standards, EMVCo standards. And anywhere a third-party wallet works, the other one works. Just to be really clear, we're also incredibly excited, for example, about what's happening in New York. I'm New York-based. What's happening in New York with open loop transit, right? Like that, if you think about the MTA in New York and what that represents in terms of creating a real flywheel for consumers, we're incredibly excited about that. So I think that the challenges are, to get back to your question, the challenges are, we're on this journey, and hopefully everyone in the room realizes that this isn't just a bet or a side bet that Google's making. This is a long-term investment. As I said, I've been working on this for 7 years. We've been in the payment space since our inception. Payments at Google isn't just our consumer platform. It's the engine that collects $120 billion a year, as I mentioned, in over 200 countries, and pays out multiple billions a year to partners.
So we used to know Google Pay as Android Pay. Can you offer a little more insight into how that transition occurred from Android Pay to Google Pay, which I think creates more of a presence in the market, but I think your perspective on that would be wonderful to hear.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think it's the original Android Pay was Android, which has 2.5 billion users around the globe, which is pretty exciting. So that's another asset that I didn't really mention. Android Pay was kind of this operating level set of services that consumers were able to use in physical stores and online. And we didn't do a good job, in my opinion, of connecting the dots for users. That Android Pay was really your relationship to Google, and not just your relationship to Google in terms of search and Gmail and YouTube, but rather it was also your financial relationship with Google and all your payment cards and your credentials and your loyalty cards and your offers. And so we made this conscious decision to not only bring that together in a way that we thought users would better understand, but also getting all of Google on board with the fact that Google Pay is the underpinnings that runs all of Google's first-party transactions. And what I mean by that is Google Play, right? Users en masse come and buy things. YouTube, Drive, on and on and on. As I mentioned earlier, a couple of hundred different places where users can buy things, where Google is the merchant. So what Google Pay is a connection of a user's financial relationship with Google, and ideally helping the user to better understand how they can get done what they need to get done on a daily basis faster, more efficiently, with less friction.
And that's part, I would assume then, that what makes the distinction or the uniqueness of Google Pay in the payments landscape. But if there are other factors, features, functions that really, within the mobile segment, are the unique value add from Google Pay, it'd be fascinating to hear what you.
Yeah, no, I think we think a lot about a payment is a payment, and payment facilitation is, as I said, table stakes.
Yeah.
But what kind of takes that to the next level are being able to do more. So the idea of walking into a Walgreens and being able to provision your Balance Rewards ID, and being able to tap to convey a payment and to make sure you're getting your rewards. We offer this today. Loyalty enrollment, we offer this today. Helping merchants do what merchants need to do, which is a user walks in a door, get them to increase their basket. these are things we think about deeply and have a lot of services around how to improve that. I think the other thing we're thinking a lot about is how to move beyond just facilitation. We spoke a little bit about India, but I think the opposing side of India might be looking at mainland China and Alipay and WeChat Pay. And if anyone has ever spent time there, I encourage everyone, if they're able. It's just amazingly fascinating to see the uptick and the engagement. And you can't use cash. You can't go to a newsstand and buy a pack of gum with cash. You're using WeChat Pay, and the merchant, largely unorganized retail,
Right.
the merchant's accepting your payment on their mobile device, and it's everywhere. And by the way, the user experiences are not beautiful. They're hard to use. And so it's amazing. The ubiquity is truly amazing. But in that context, you have an ecosystem, a traditional financial ecosystem, of networks and issuing banks and all the underlying infrastructure that's basically been disintermediated, right? Like they basically no longer have a role because all of the value sits with these stored value wallets. And the approach we took in India completely flipped that on its head. In fact, a lot of the stored value wallets have now moved to the model I described earlier, where UPI is effectively the rails. So the added value is around how to create the platform that moves beyond facilitation, that is enabling the user to get done more of what they need to get done. And in fast serve, for example, or quick serve restaurants, what we're seeing happening there in terms of being able to add enormous value to users' day through things like conversational commerce, it's incredibly powerful. Being able to go to Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts and using Google Assistant to place your order so that it's ready when you walk in the door. That's kind of how we're thinking about adding value to pay, adding value to commerce, and ideally for everyone in the room, right? Driving the velocity that everyone needs to sustain their business.
So you mentioned earlier the transit use case around contactless. The contactless, I don't want to call it a puzzle, I don't want to call it a challenge, but we all know the use of contactless here in the US is not where it is in other markets. I certainly have a contactless card in my wallet, and I use it at a variety of establishments, and it is quicker and easier and smoother and simpler. I will also say that when I use that contactless card, it's often other people in line behind me are dumbfounded that I have a card that I tap and go. So we have a whole set of other issues that we need to contend with. But from the perspective of Google Pay and the growth and advancement of contactless, can you share a little bit about what the organization is doing to sort of move that boulder up the hill? Because certainly we at ETA and within the organization, and Steve Cleve is really active and involved in the work we're doing to address this challenge. So would love to hear your perspective.
I think the U.S. is a really, I have this luxury of seeing so many markets, and the U.S. is one extreme, Australia is another. Australia, what's interesting if you visited is contactless cards are so pervasive and they work so well and so fast that the need for mobile is questionable. And we do a lot to try and improve that user value proposition. Simple things like rich receipts that show you where you were when you made that transaction help a lot. Or in London, this idea of tapping in and tapping out of the turnstile. If you don't tap out, you get penalized. And in many instances, they open up the turnstiles during prime rush hour because people get backed up and they can't get to work on time. So they just open up the terminals and they kind of leave people to tap out on their own. So what we do is in the user experience, we let people tap out on their device. So it's simple things like that. But in terms of your question on contactless here in the States, I mean, listen, we had a large holdout merchant just flip in the right direction. And we immediately saw that transaction volume uptick, which was very exciting. And I think it's a slow burn. My personal view is I don't believe that contactless cards are going to help.
Now,
well, I mean, I don't think they're going to help. I think they'll help the industry. I don't believe they're going to help the pays per se. I think there's an opportunity for, quite frankly, the networks and the issuers to get behind and push mobile as the form factor. Our view on NFC as a form factor is we're sort of agnostic. You know, in markets like India, where you have low-end devices that don't have NFC antennas, there are lots of other ways that we use or deploy to enable merchants and users to convey payment. You know, we have audio QR technology, which allows for authentication over audio waves that users can hear. There are lots of ways. I mean, I think our view is we want to be where users want to be, and we have to ultimately acknowledge in each market that devices are variable.
Okay.
And so that's kind of how we think about
it.
Slow burn.
A fair point. So Spencer, you acknowledged and talked a little bit about conversational commerce, and we at ETA were fortunate to have a wonderful webinar actually that Steve participated in with your partners from Duncan, talking about the work Google has been doing in the conversational commerce space. So can you share a little bit about kind of the next level of where you're taking conversational commerce? Because that too is a significant component of creating a new payments experience.
Yeah, we think a lot about this as well. And I mean, I think maybe I'll use an analogy here, which is just mobile in general. In 2001, Docomo launched the first 3G network. And it wasn't until 5 years later, or 6 years later, in 2007, when the smartphone really started to emerge. And the way users, obviously all of our Google's products were available. The app space was pretty narrow at the time. But what we saw almost happen overnight was user expectations for how they engage with their mobile device. The tectonic shift was so fast. So one of the things that we did early on in the shopping context was we saw lots of shopping queries. Users are on their mobile devices, they're out in the field, they're shopping, they're buying groceries. So the nature of queries shifted pretty radically. People started asking Google questions, not just about product information, but about availability. Like, what's the specification on this new TV, and is it available? So we started appending our search results with local availability. And by the way, the merchants, who are also marketers, were very happy to share this data with us for obvious reason. It hopefully drive more users to the physical store. But users just have come to expect that a search result today is going to be more than just an answer to a question. It's going to anticipate what they want. And I think conversational commerce, what we're seeing in that same evolution of how users engage with our services is pretty amazing, right? Like, just the number of queries that are voice-based versus textual is, absolutely skyrocketing. The kinds of questions that users are asking the assistant. And that's morphed from order my latte, which we're able to serve up now and effectively make that a seamless experience where the payment's complete, the user goes up, they say their name, and they walk away with their drink, to really users starting to ask questions about, what bills do I have to pay, right? Like, what's my balance? And so what you're gonna start to see is a pretty significant wave of integrations and innovation, which I think is going to really revolutionize how we all engage, as consumers, how we all engage. So we're quite excited about that.
Right. And so following on that point, again, we won't hold you to anything. Next great thing that you sort of feel will drive the industry forward in perhaps a unique way. You sit at Google in a role where technology is fueling new product development. What things excite you most about the industry currently?
Yeah,
and it could be Spencer's view or Google's view.
Yeah, no, those are one and the same at this point, I think, for a while. I'm generally excited by the pace of partnership, both in this space and on the merchant side. I think that there's a real penchant to partner. In particular, if you're a merchant and you're dependent, you're omni-channel merchant dependent on multiple channels to derive revenue. What we're seeing is a fear around marketplaces that I think is real. Merchants are really feeling that pain. And the level of interest and excitement in wanting to innovate, even sitting here today in the meeting room, the number of questions around joint innovation is really, and by the way, when we started, we were seen as, and I think it's safe to say, our intentions weren't clear. We were seen as a little bit of a competitive, not necessarily a competitive threat, but a threat. And what we're seeing now is 7 or 8 years later, a willingness to partner in a way that I haven't seen in my time at the company. So that's exciting. That's I think as a partnerships person, that's kind of front and center for me. And then I think there's a lot of innovation that again is happening in Asia that I think is very much on the forefront around user engagement and around helping users beyond just search and discovery and payment, but helping users building on everything that the mobile device and the mobile revolution, I know we're all kind of tired of hearing about it, but building on everything that device really offers. Proximity being kind of, number one. Affinity, right? Like if I have an affinity to a third party, a merchant or a financial institution, there's so much more that I think Google can be doing in terms of machine learning and AI to help that user get more from that relationship.
I was just going to say, leveraging the technology to enrich the payments experience is a huge component that we see across the industry. It's a common focus of customer-focused, customer-centric, consumer-centric, and I would think that permeates everything you do at Google.
Absolutely. And I think we spend a lot of time right now thinking about obviously open banking and PSD2. We're in the throes of that right now across Europe and really thinking through what the implications are. But if you kind of play that forward and you see what's happening in Canada with faster payments, what's happening in Australia, what's really happening in every major market, our feeling is open platforms win. There's a lot of beneficiaries. We think everyone can benefit. I think in the US, we're all challenged in serving millennials, right? Like this recent Gartner report, the Millennial Report, if you haven't read it, you should read it. But it talks about the fact that 80% of financial institutions are a threat in the next dozen years, right? And that's a real problem. And I think if you think about the assets and what we offer in terms of AI and ML, both on Pay and our cloud platform, partnership is really, I think, going to hopefully be the cornerstone of helping the entire ecosystem move past and really start to speak to this kind of next wave of consumers.
Yeah, it's stunning to think about the impact of this industry in transforming everything we know and do. We didn't even get to talk about Google Cloud, but we've got a few moments here. I don't know if anybody has any questions for Spencer, but we did want to grab a minute or two to open the floor and see if there were any questions. It's a tremendous opportunity to hear from an executive here at Google about, there's a question. Do we have mics? We may not have mics.
I can repeat it.
How do you think about secure remote commerce?
Yeah, that's a good question. How do we feel about SRC or secure remote commerce? We're spending a lot of time thinking about that. Ultimately, we think a lot about what the merchant needs. Merchants are not great at technology. We want their checkout experience to be easy, simple. They shouldn't have to do multiple integrations to support multiple forms of payments or even multiple networks. And so I think that with the right incentives, I think it could be a good thing. The details, if anyone has the full details, I welcome a meeting after this to talk through it. But the full details are yet to be released, largely because I think There's a lot that the networks are working through, but I think ultimately, if it's not easy and ubiquitous for merchants and users, it's not going to scale. And I think the other piece I'll add to that is they need to think a lot about authentication. And what I mean is, if a user is forced through any hoops and it has any bearing on merchant conversion, that's a problem. So, and that's ultimately what we care about. We want users to have a great experience. We want merchants to be able to very quickly collect payments, and we want them to be able to move on to their next customer.
Any other questions? We
There's
now
one at the
have
back.
there's
As a follow-up to that, what's beyond tap and pay for that user experience where you can use other technology at the point of sale for a physical checkout?
Yeah, so we have a number of things. We have a capability called Smart Tap, which enables the passing of a loyalty credential or an offer. We have a program that's operating at great scale right now, which is effectively an API that allows any third party that has an artifact that they care about. It could be an offer, it could be a reward, it could be a loyalty ID, to very simply put that on a website, an app, which it just says save to Google Pay.
Cursor in the middle.
And then a user saves that, and now that asset is tied to their Google account. In the case of a Walgreens, just as a quick example, once I do that as a user, I save balance rewards to my account. When I'm near a Walgreens, which by the way, I think there are about 8,000 Walgreens, when I'm near a Walgreens, it's going to say, hey, Spencer, you're near Walgreens and you have points to spend, go spend them. So that's one example. And then of course we have our e-commerce channel, which is operating at massive scale, which many of you in the room are supporting. So we have these APIs that allow for merchants to deploy a simple Google Pay buy button. And we are just a facilitator, we're not processing. And that allows for any user who's logged in who has a card on file, one of 100, as I said earlier, hundreds of thousands of cards on file. It allows for that merchant to convert very efficiently and for the user to get a lot of value in the form of decreased friction.
all right. One question left because we're running over time.
Hi. What's the interaction between Google Play and Google Pay? Because we have heard earlier from Google Pay team that there is a certain, well, there is also a first question like, are you already using Google Play? Oh, we may have a problem.
Yeah, so the underpinnings, so I'll take a user view on this, if that's okay, but the underpinnings are a user goes to the Play Store, which is where they buy apps, where they buy video content or some media. They enter a credential. That credential, that payment card, is available across all of Google's first-party properties. And then when a user goes to Google Pay, it's available, and it suggests to that user to tokenize that credential so that they can start to tap and pay in physical stores. So the underpinnings of that platform, it's effectively Google's payments platform, is completely interoperable and connected. Does that answer your sort of? You could connect after this, and I'm happy to dig in deeper.
All right. Well, with that, please join me in thanking Spencer
Thank
for his
you.
time today
Thank you so
and
much.
sharing
Yeah, thank you
all
so
the
much.
exciting things Google's
Really
doing.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you
Thank
so much.
Thank you.